This is Block 6, the Great Depression, Section 4, the 100 Days, with the section beginning the Agricultural Adjustment Act, or the AAA. This is relief, and it is a very interesting way to offer relief to America's farmers. As we remember, even from the 1920s, America's farmers were overproducing food. That food prices were too low to allow farm families to live in any sort of economic security. This persisted through the 1920s and into the Great Depression. That a farmer's first reaction to getting low prices for food is obviously to increase the amount of food you grow to make up the cost. But all this does on a macroeconomic scale is increase the amount of food produced even further, driving the costs further down. The brain trust of Roosevelt, his New Deal leaders, his progressives, came up with the idea known as the Agricultural Adjustment Act. It did two things. First, it provided direct checks to farmers to help them pay their mortgages. That's a standard relief by this time in 1933. The government is giving out welfare, the government is giving out checks to help people stay in their homes, etc. The second part was kind of the more revolutionary part, if you will. In order to reduce supply, the government began paying American farmers to reduce the amount of crops that they grew. In other words, farmers were being paid not to farm. So if you had 100 acres of land, the government would pay you the cost of a third of that land, the price for the crops you would have gotten for not growing anything on that land. So, to make a simple picture out of it, if this is your farm, and you have been growing food in all 4 sections of your farm, in order to reduce the amount of produce on the open market, and let's say you got 50 bucks for each section, $50 for the price of these crops, what the government would do is it would tell you, look, do not farm that section, we will pay you $50 for not farming it. Fine. It's an attempt to reduce supply, to increase prices. But not only was it with crops, the Department of Agriculture, through the Agricultural Adjustment Act, also ordered the killing of millions of pigs, tens of millions of chickens, all to be disposed of in order to raise the prices of those goods. Critics, of course, had a problem with that. First of all, they said it was inhumane to kill pigs and chickens, for human consumption was one thing, but to kill pigs and chickens that were purposely not going to be eaten was something else entirely. It is an attempt to create what's called artificial scarcity. And in this artificial scarcity, a lot of things happen. First of all, its main goal was to raise agricultural prices. This it did. The price of a bushel of wheat or a bushel of corn did increase. But it also increased farm unemployment. That if I was a farmer and had 4 hired hands to work on my farm, if I am not growing anything in a quarter of my land, then obviously I can lay that person off. So it did increase prices for farmers, but it did also increase agricultural unemployment. It increased the price of food for customers already suffering under the Depression. Now, their corn and their wheat and whatnot was going to cost more to put on the dining room table every night. And of course, there is the moral cost of producing so much perfectly good food. Another problem that it had was, especially in the South, there are tenant farmers. You remember that from our Reconstruction unit. That these tenant farmers in the South, the owner of the farm is the one who got the relief check, and the tenant farmer might be the one who was completely out of places to farm. So it hurt black Americans severely in the South. It hurt poor white tenant farmers in the South. It is an idea with a stated goal of raising farm prices with not much of a look at the other consequences that accrued from it. That was the Agricultural Adjustment Act. It was deemed to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court and was struck down a few years later. The Supreme Court said that the Congress could not regulate that type of commerce, that what an individual farmer produced on his farm was not interstate commerce as defined by the Constitution. And that ruling really angered President Roosevelt and his New Dealers.